The 50 millimeter focal length is probably one of the most regarded focal lengths in photography in so many different disciplines of photography. And I think what makes it most interesting is not only its versatility, but also how affordable these lenses can be. And I keep running into it in so many ways, in not only in the street photography world, but in my latest venture as a portrait photographer. So many of the greats use a 50, and the way people speak about it, the way they regard it is something I have not been able to connect with. And I thought it was time to really take a look at the 50. Sure, you can take someone else's account of it, and I've trust me, I've watched many of videos and read many of articles and blog posts about this focal length and how it's transformed and helped so many photographers, but it just never clicked. And I'm in the season of humble pie, right? And a lot of the things you hear, it's easy to like whatever. There's no way. Why would I just lock myself into one focal length when these zoom lenses that are on the market today, and quite frankly, for some time, have been amazing. And you can get this versatility of anywhere from a 24 to a 105, and in that is 50. And then coming into this space as a portrait photographer, I am almost never wide open. So you talk about the upsides of a 50 being how fast of a lens it can be in regards to a prime lens, 1.4, 1.2. I don't need such a wide open aperture. I'm often at f8 really, and that's where I do a lot of my work these days. So it's very easy for me to poo poo the idea of a 50 and walk myself out of it, but I decided to take the challenge. I decided to really take the time to listen and absorb. If so many talented people that have walked this journey before me is saying something about a focal length, I think I owe it to myself, my creativity, my professional progression to check it out. And that's exactly what I did. And I didn't want to just try it out for a few days. I wanted to commit. I wanted to embody it. I wanted to get to know it on an intimate level and understand the limitations of it, the upsides of it. And so I had to adopt it for all of my cameras, right? So I've got my Olympus, I've got my Fuji, I've got my Sony, and all of my worlds. Let's dive into this 50 and see really what it's about. And as you can imagine, it was a struggle. From the onset, it just felt tight. It felt like everything I was doing on a 50 was claustrophobic. It felt like I was fighting myself to give the subject room to breathe, room to be. I was struggling with composition. I literally had to relearn composition from a totally different perspective. And that in itself was difficult. It was challenging, but as I began to figure out, like, okay, um, this is not a 28, this is not a 35, and 35 is cool. It's not my thing. Um, the advice that you hear around the 24 to 28 focal length is get close. But with a 50, this was a whole different ball game. What I started to notice was, in respects to composition, I could back away, and I could sort of line up my composition the same way I would a 28, but just back up a little bit. And there's this beautiful unveiling of what in my mind I describe it as being a hero. The subject popped a lot more because it's a little longer of a focal length. That depth of field and separation is a slight nuance that existed, and it was like, wow, this is This is really nice. So as I began to understand how to approach composition with the 50 in mind, the results started to become, quite frankly, mind blowing. There were times where I would sit back and I would look at the photos of the family photos of the baby around the house, and I'd be like, wow, this is, I remember this when I first touched the DSLR, the Canon T4i, and my kit came with a 50, and I remember leaving that thing on auto, and of course, on auto, those DSLRs did such a good job of shooting as wide open as possible, and you getting that bokeh and that depth of field and that separation, that raw separation from the subject. And that was one of the things that first drew me into photography, was like, man, you can't really replicate this anywhere else. And then it went somewhere else for me, right? Learning the camera and the triangle, the exposure triangle. And I never got back to it until now. And now I'm starting to see a lot of that magic in these photos that doesn't scream, this was an expensive camera, this was a professional camera, but it screams, this subject is worthy of separation from the scene of which it exists. It's such a dope thing to see for yourself. And then you start to chase it. Then you start to like, I need to recreate this magic. And then a lot of the things I heard about 50 millimeters started to make sense. You zoom with your feet, and you start to you start to back up and even come forward. So if I want to have a relatively tightly cropped portrait, you need to commit. I don't care about cutting off the top of someone's head anymore. I care about the micro expressions in their face and what the eyes are communicating. And then you see the fall off of depth of field in the back, and it's like, whoa. And this is at like 5.6, right? There's no funny business here. And that's also something to learn. I don't need to shoot wide open unless I need a lot of light. It's been a wild journey committing to 50 over the last year or so. And like I mentioned, doing so on so many of my cameras in so many different let's call it, in so many different use cases, my Fuji, my Sony, my Olympus, I'm starting to become, or I have become, familiar with this focal length in a way that just feels natural. Natural is also subjective. When I say natural, I'm pretty comfortable grabbing any camera with a 50 and leaving the house for the day. That is something that did not exist, and that is something that it probably was about 5 or 6 months in committing in this journey that started to unfold. And as I reapproach composition, as I started to understand the zooming with your feet advice that you hear, and I started to really dial in the intention of what I'm shooting. Zoom, the idea of a zoom lens and this all-in-one focal length really doesn't appeal to me anymore. And I'm not saying it doesn't have its use cases, and I'm not saying I won't go back to zoom lenses. What I'm saying is I'm very comfortable and it feels natural using a 50 millimeters, and really is a super versatile focal length. And I really do see how it challenges your creativity, your approach to composition, your approach to intention when it comes to your subject, where you're placing your subject in the background, on and on it goes. I do see, I can't even say the hype, because I don't think 50 millimeters is really a hyped focal length per se, but I do understand why so many people learn on it, why so many people thrive on it, why so many people just default to it. It's a super dope focal length. Other than that, I think the 50 millimeter focal length is definitely one that I would recommend to someone. I'll join the long list of photographers that say you got to get you a 50. And the price of a 50 is you can't beat it. They're so cheap, they're so affordable. Go vintage, get you some really nice glass that gets you some interesting characteristics. You can't lose with a 50. And even though I know a lot of us have 50s and we don't use them, take them out, man. Put them on your camera and leave the house. It's such a fun focal length. But in any way, welcome to 2026. Thank you so much for the time that you've given me here today by watching this video. And I always say time is the most valuable resource that we have. And I don't take it lightly that you have shared some of yours here with me today. Like the video if you like it, subscribe, plenty more content coming. A lot of exciting decisions that I'm making, and I'm trying to get out to you guys. So yeah, stick with me. My name is Ramon. I'm out of here. Peace.